listening to the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast, Episode 7. Hello, welcome to this edition of the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm your host, Tawara Moody. Been a pretty busy month. The last couple of weeks, I've been working on a webinar series called Launch Your Book Online. And I thought this would be some pretty good topics that we could cover in some of these podcasts. So for this episode 7, I'm going to give you a sneak peek into the first 10 minutes of the second webinar. And that webinar was called 5 Types of Launch Events. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, what is a virtual event, which I've been doing over the past 5 years. I've coordinated over 150 virtual events. So we'll talk about what a virtual event is. We'll also talk a little bit about platform. What do, folks, what are they talking about when they're talking about an author's platform? And I'll also cover some of the platforms or the places online that are best for hosting a virtual event. So you're going to get all that in just the first 10 minutes of the webinar series. And afterwards, I'll tell you how you can get the rest of the webinar series. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy. Hello. Welcome to the Literary Entrepreneurs webinar series, Launch Your Book Online. Today we are on part 2 of the webinar series. We're going to talk about 5 types of launch events. Now, if you joined us last week, this is a 4-part series. Last week we talked about the 7 essentials for effective book marketing. And as you can see, we have 2 more in the webinar series coming up. 5 steps for a successful launch and tools to keep you on track. So today, we're going to kind of keep building this process. Last week was more of a foundation class where you needed to have certain things in place already before you even start planning out how you're going to launch your new book release. So today we're going to look at the types of events that you can use to kind of launch your book events. And I'm going to start off with what is kind of considered kind of easier to coordinate, and then we're going to move our way up to what may take a little bit more time to coordinate and get together. Just a reminder of the Literary Entrepreneur resources. If you have purchased this class, of course, you received a free copy of the Literary Entrepreneurs Toolkit that should be available in your packet. There's a link where you can download the full PDF version of the toolkit. This is the first book in a series, so you definitely want to get this first one. We'll have toolkit number 2 coming out probably this summer, and toolkit number 3 should be out in early 2015. Also, for other resources, the Literary Entrepreneur Podcast is every first and third Monday. So right now, you're here just as a reminder, and this is a webinar series that I hope will help guide you in your book marketing planning. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about what are virtual events. We're going to talk about some popular virtual platforms, how to choose your event, and also 5 launch events. There'll be time for question and answers. This session is recorded live, but as I have been mentioning quite a bit, if you're not able to join us live, please go back to your packet and look up information about the Facebook group. You can definitely post your questions inside that Facebook group. Alright, so let's first start off with what is a virtual event. A virtual event is strictly online via the internet. I talked a little bit last week about some offline things that you can do, but when we're talking about a virtual event, it's not really, there's no real physical location that you have to be at. If you wanted to launch your book online, in your pajamas, you're more than welcome to do that in the comforts of your own home. That's what makes it a virtual event pretty, well, actually, it's a good opportunity for authors. Not only is it a good opportunity to be comfortable with wherever you're presenting the event, but also it's inexpensive. So when we're talking about virtual events, we're talking about invites that are going to be best via email or social media links. So you want to think in terms of some type of URL or link that people can click on to access the virtual event or access the place where they plan to attend your virtual event. The event or the schedule of events, depending on what you decide to do, you may decide to do a one-time event that lasts maybe an hour or a few hours, or you may have a schedule of events that last over maybe even a number of weeks. But you should have a central location where you can guide people to what's going on with the virtual event. Okay, so the complexity of the event really revolves around the type of event and the platform. And that's what we're going to be talking about in this webinar. We're going to talk about different types of platforms so you can kind of get a feel for what you're comfortable doing. Anyone has probably the ability to do all of the events that I present today in the webinar, but for starting off, maybe you want to start with the basic and then move your way up. So what is a platform? I wanted to talk about this because in the publishing industry, you hear a lot about what is a platform or do you have a platform? Now, if you're a person who follows politics, I'm not one of those in particular, but the formal definition of a platform is an opportunity to voice one's views or initiate action. But we don't really need that definition. We're authors. And so for a platform for an author or entrepreneur, that's more about that growing audience of people or readers who have become attracted to your books or products. So if you're attempting to pursue traditional publishing, one of the main things they're going to be asking you is, what is your platform? Basically, they're asking you, how large of an audience of readers do you already have who have the potential to purchase this book that you want, this traditional publisher to pick up on. And you'll notice, if you think about some of the more popular authors who kind of get a book deal fairly easily or quickly, it's usually because they have a large audience already. They already have a platform. A lot of speakers who go around the country and they do a lot of speaking. Obviously they can pick up different readers in different markets, and that's what a traditional publisher is looking for. They're looking for the return on investment of if they give this particular author in advance, that they'll get that back, based on the platform. Okay, so it's essential, even if you're independently published, it's still essential to your book marketing plan to have a platform. And this basically boils down to what I talked about a good bit in part 1, and that is to be visible on a consistent basis. You have some loyal readers out there who've read your previous books, and then you'll always, hopefully always, will be attracting new readers to your platform. Okay, so let's jump into the location of your virtual events, which is pretty important. Even though you don't have a physical location like a store or someplace, like if you did something offline, you still want a general location for people where they would come to support you in your book launch. So, starting off, you're going to have, one person, two people, a group of people. But as you are growing or getting to know people online, there should be a certain location. It may be someplace on social media. It may be on your website or your blog. But there's a certain place where you probably get more people that you interact with than any other place. And that's a good starting point for when you want to launch your virtual event. What's that place or platform where you seem to have the most traffic, the most people who are growing or getting to know you? Okay, so let's look at some virtual platforms, and some of these you should find pretty familiar. There's nothing up here that might not be too new to you. There may be some platforms you haven't used yet, but most of these you should be familiar with. The first one that I'm going to bring up is Facebook, and I'm going to bring up a listing of different social media or social networks: Twitter, Google+, HOA. HOA stands for Hangout on Air. That's the live version of the Hangouts. Pinterest, Goodreads. I always tell authors Facebook may be the number one social network, but Goodreads is the number one book lovers social network, so you definitely should have a presence on that platform. On the other side over here, I'm going to bring up some other platforms. You may have a blog. You may have done some videos before. Maybe you have a video channel on YouTube, online live radio, podcasts, webinars, and mailing lists. Now, in part one, I talked a good bit about mailing lists and the importance of that. That's definitely considered a platform, probably the strongest of your platforms. All right, there was your sneak peek inside of the Launch Your Book Online series, and that was part 2, where we talked about the 5 types of launch events. So if you really like what you heard, you can go to theliteraryentrepreneur.com. Right there on the home page, you'll see more of these sneak peeks as well as information on how you can see or purchase the entire web series. For a even better URL, you can go to theliteraryentrepreneur.com/LYBO series. That's theliteraryentrepreneur.com/LYBO series. That's a direct link to the entire series where you can look at each of the individual webinars, or if you want to access all 4 webinars in this series, you're welcome to. So stay tuned for the next webinar. I'll give you another sneak peek inside this series that I really enjoyed putting together, and I hope you find beneficial. So I'm going to go ahead and close out this webinar by reminding you, if you missed a previous webinar, you can go to literaryentrepreneur.com/podcast to catch all of those episodes. And in the meantime, remember, you're more than an author, you're a literary entrepreneur. Writing and marketing is a business. Let's learn how to tell the world about